week from today. That's what I'm going to say.
You're in Samantha.
Yeah.
Or 728 feet.
Yeah.
Only song next week.
It's so bad, so I just shut it down.
Yeah.
No, because Jeff will come in and say, no, I'll get it. So I'll leave it.
Okay. Should he have a podcast?
He did. So I don't know. I don't know. You know what my outline's done? Who cares if it's right or wrong? It's what it is. And at least he's not going to look at it and say, well, you didn't put much into this. But I hope he also doesn't look, as I say, I hope he don't look at it and say, oh, that was way more than mine. Yeah, it's going to help me keep the commentary for sure. Because now I've got it broke up to what I need to talk about.
I think each of these sounds
The theme that's due interim, okay, that includes those 6 topics. I don't know how we're supposed to do it. Are we supposed to just use our what are our resources? And I'm thankful it's not the 25-page one last year. It's 12. So it used to be 4. Yuck. So anyway, that's question number 1 for Friday. I'm sure people a lot of people because I'd like to start with
Friday research.
Correct.
I want to make sure I know the point.
Yep. But I'm telling you, you feel like you get something out of that. You feel like you really did something. I take full responsibility. What?
Yeah, Laredo got to kill him. Oh, that's yeah, here.
Oh, we got to just shut that projector off now.
That's asking for trouble.
Do we have time?
I'm sure. I don't know.
It's not even want to turn off. It's standby. Yeah. Well, then it says power off on the screen. You have to do it again. Give me this. No, don't be sorry. I was so happy. You don't know how happy I was. Say done.
I'm not in my teeth.
I don't. Now it works. All right. Good morning. Tim Kennard's going to lead our song in a moment. Our opening prayer will be Eric Bishop. And our scripture reading will be Cole Mealer. Then Kevin Haynes is going to be speaking with us this morning. We're continuing that. Is it The Glory of Preaching? Is that the title of the series? Yes. Looking forward to what Kevin has to share with us this morning. I think it'll be real good. And then after that, Tim Burrow will be leading our closing prayer. Tim?
I think we're having some technical difficulties this morning, but we'll be singing The Greatest Commands. So we'll start with the altos. Proceed. Love one another, for love is of God. He who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. God is love.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we just come before you now humbled because of your love, because of all the blessings we have, because of that love. Help us to come to you this morning with an open heart and open mind so that we are able to hear what Kevin has to say. Just speak through him and help us to have open hearts to hear it. Be with us today and help us forget all of the outside things in the world that we can be thinking about and really focus on studying your word and let you speak into our heart. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning. If you'll open your Bibles to John chapter 11, you're reading verses 21 through 35. It's John chapter 11, verses 21 through 35. And in this text, we have Jesus approaching Mary and Martha to converse with them about the death of Lazarus. Then Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Your brother will rise again, Jesus told her. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God who comes into the world. Having said this, she went back and called her sister Mary, saying in private, The teacher is here and is calling for you. As soon as Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw that Mary got up quickly and went out. They followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to cry there. As soon as Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. Where have you put him? He asked. Lord, they told him, come and see. Jesus wept.
When I walked into the hallway of the hospital, I was already a little anxious as to what I would see as I entered into the room. The room where Jack lay, there in that hospital bed, surrounded by his wife of more than 60 years, his only daughter and his son-in-law, and the doctor who was listening to Jack's chest for any sign of heartbeat. For the next few hours, the routine would be the same. The family, the nurses, and I would watch as Jack would go for several seconds before finally taking a series of raspy breaths. For a few moments, the family would be cheered before he would once again go another several seconds without a breath. That routine was broken every 10 to 15 minutes with the doctor re-entering into that room, starting with trying to find a pulse on his wrist and then on his neck, then taking the stethoscope from around his neck and listening to see if that old heart still worked. I was called to the room because I was the preacher. But I was also a friend of the family, and they didn't want to go through this alone. They needed somebody to go through that or go with them along that road. That road that would see their dad, their father-in-law, their husband cross over the Jordan into the next life. When it happened, it wasn't the dramatic scene that Hollywood tends to portray. He didn't rise up out of the bed and gasp a last breath and then fall back to the bed. It was much more serene. It was much more peaceful. But when it occurred, it was still painful. It was painful for those who searched the family as they were searching the doctor's eyes for any sign of hope, as they looked at me, the preacher, for any sign of comfort. I've been in many rooms very much like Jack's room, including my own mother's just 6 weeks ago. Rooms where somebody had breathed their last. Rooms where, though unseen, angels escorted them back to the Creator. It was a tearful time. It was a serious event. It was a solemn occasion. It was a holy happening. But I also have stood at the front of the auditorium, standing there beside a nervous young man in a tuxedo, there with all of his buddies lined up there beside him. And his smile brightened the room more than any of the candles could, as he waited for the things that would take place in just a few moments. The auditorium is beautifully decorated. It's full of family and friends. They're there to witness the most joyous occasion. The familiar music, the processional starts. The doors swing open in the back. And there stands a young lady in a white gown. And as she stands at that door, she radiates all of the beauty and all the purity and all the hope of what begins today is going to last a lifetime. The hours that follow are full of happiness and full of laughter. As a preacher, I've been invited into both of those rooms. One filled with life support machines, and sterile tubes, and bustling medical personnel. The other filled with candles and cake and kinfolk. As a preacher, Jesus knew both rooms well also. He also was invited to stand beside families as they said goodbye to the dearest on earth to them. He and his disciples stood with family members as they said good luck to those that they cared about, and God bless as they celebrated the wedding vows and then the feast that followed. Jesus was familiar with the phrase, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. My assignment this morning is to speak about the glory of preaching. This specific series, as we've been talking about it over the last couple of weeks here together, this last several days, my assignment specifically relates to this particular verse out of Romans chapter 12 and verse 15. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. You see, this series hasn't just been about the duties of the preacher. His responsibilities, his work, his labor in the Lord, his message, the topics that he needs to cover, his role as an evangelist and teacher. Nor is this series about the trials and the difficulties of preachers. We've all heard those stories, haven't we? Those who come back and those who were unprepared for the toils and the horror stories sometimes of problems with people inside and outside of congregations. No. This series is about the glories of getting to preach, not the duties of having to preach. And you may be thinking to yourself this morning that what I described, especially in those first few words, that doesn't really sound, especially as we're talking about somebody who's about to take their last breath. Kevin, that doesn't sound all that glorious to me. I would hope you wouldn't make up your mind on that point just yet. You see, most of us tend to migrate more towards the merriment over the mourning. We would usually choose the feasts over the funerals. We would prefer the weddings over the weeping. And the reason for doing so is that we want that immediate gratification. We want the fun part over more of the joy of being there and intimately connected with people when they're hurting. I'm going to look at two specific passages today. And it's not an exegetical lesson, it's just to help us understand something of that Jesus knows about those times as well. He understands that. Both of those scenarios find Jesus in both of those rooms. And because of that, he was gifted with the glory of preaching. No doubt your minds will run to many other texts besides these two. But I want to call your attention to two found in the Gospel of John. The first beginning in chapter 2. You know the story. You know the passage where Jesus is at the wedding feast. Verse 2 tells us really quickly here that Jesus and his disciples were invited, which tells us something about the kind of man that Jesus was. It tells us something about the way that he responds to people. He isn't just a downer. He is one who enjoys the company of people, and they enjoy his company as well. Now, don't jump the gun on that. Before there was concern over what to do with the lack of wine right here, there was a lot of feasting going on. Usually in the first century right here, it would be a week-long celebration. Several days of good food and wine and family and friends and all the things. In fact, the word that was used over and over again in the Old Testament was that their hearts were merry or glad. Do you get the picture? Do you get an image in your mind? You picture Jesus standing all over there in the corner with his buddies, and they're all huddled around, and they're all talking to themselves, and they're all concerned about all the drinking that's going on? Or do you rather picture Jesus mingling in the midst of the crowd, speaking with the people, celebrating with the family, wishing good thoughts and happiness to the groom and the bride? As a preacher, I've had an awful lot of invitations to be a part of celebrations, family and community. I've had the opportunity to speak at high school baccalaureate services. I've been invited to speak at a Veterans Day celebration. I've had the opportunity to pray at city council meetings. I've been invited to perform more than 50 weddings in my time there at Lampasas. I remember a very specific invitation to come to say a few words and to pray a blessing over the adoption of a little baby named Luke and a little girl named Jenna. Steve and Julie had been unable to have children for many years. And twice I received the phone call to come to their home. And as we all waited, grandparents were already there, friends and family members, very close ones, and I had the opportunity to sit there and wait for the doorbell to ring. As a lady showed up with a little bundle in her arms, a bag of a few clothes and a few toys, but the biggest and the best blessing, the baby in the arms. I was privileged to speak words of praise and thanksgiving to our Father. I was blessed with words of asking God to give them guidance as parents. There were many tears. Tears of joy. Tears of thanksgiving. Tears of hope. That's what we usually think of the fun part, right? Of ministry. But while Jesus is invited to attend the wedding in John chapter 2, he's also called on to come quickly and to tend to his friend who is about to die. And the text that Cole read for us over in John chapter 11, the second text that I want to mention just for a few moments. You have the story of Jesus weeping there at the tomb of Lazarus. We often want to talk about, well, why did he delay? Why did he wait? Why didn't he come sooner? Why didn't he, if he was really a friend, if he really cared, why didn't he go sooner? Or we want the discussion about, well, let's talk about this resurrection that he comes in and he begins to, I know that one day he will be raised. Less often do we explore the depth of Jesus' emotion, his compassion, his concern and care. Jesus loved Lazarus. You remember that in verse 3, don't you? The one whom you love is sick. Jesus loved him so much and loved these ladies so much that when he comes to them, he is overcome. He is deeply troubled. He is deeply moved in spirit. This isn't the first time that Jesus has dealt with those who are dealing with death and loss. He'd done so throughout his ministry. He stopped a caravan on its way to the cemetery and touched the coffin of a young man who was responsible, apparently at that time, for his mother. Jairus' daughter, the centurion's servant. several situations where death had occurred. Jesus is a part. He's been called to be a part of that. But not only loss of life in his ministry, there are other losses as well. There's loss of health. There's loss of eyesight. There's loss of mobility. And while we typically think of this part of ministry as less joyous, we should never see it as less glorious. As a preacher, I've been called on to come to comfort families in multiple situations. The story I started with Jack, that family, I was a part of their family in many situations. There were all kinds of times. When I first got to Lampasas, I didn't know very many of the people there. And the lady, the daughter of Jack, who was in that room, called soon after I got there to work. Her daughter had been killed in an automobile accident at 19 years old with a young baby daughter still alive. Well, who's going to raise the daughter? The boyfriend at that time had left. And they're struggling to try to find out why. God, why? The baby is... We'll take care of the baby. We'll do all that we can right here. But the grief and just the outpouring of emotion and week after week as we try to work through study and just talk things out, and as I tried to listen to the hurt that's going on in her. I was a grief counselor at the high school. Our high school, while we were there during that time, several different things took place. One, we had two boats that collided, and one ran over the top of the other, killing the two that were in the boat. High school students who stayed all night long out there in the water before anybody found them. All that hope, all those dreams, all those possibilities, all those things that you would think in life they're going to have the chance to enjoy life, it's gone. I sat beside a man my age at that particular time, sat in his living room while he grieved his way, and it was a furrowed brow. There were few tears, but he was trying to wrap his mind around what he had heard from the sheriff's office. His daughter and a bunch of friends had gone down to a railroad trestle. And apparently what had taken place, there were some who could actually, there was a spot in the railroad trestle where you could lay down. It was underneath the railroad trestle and let the train roll over you. She got scared at that particular situation, and so she tried to run off of the railroad trestle and didn't make it. And he's there trying the best that he can, trying to make some kind of sense. Why was she even there? Who thinks that's fun? Why would you do something like that? Does Jesus care? Does he see? Does he really feel what I feel? When I first got to Lampasas, I made no secret that I was from Missouri. I was not from Texas. And they reminded me of that a lot as well. One particular lady named Janice reminded me of that one particular Sunday morning after I preached a rather strong sermon. That was her comment. Yes, but you're not from here. She didn't like what I had to say. She struggled with what I had to say. You are not one of us, is what she was saying. That was until a few months later when her oldest son, in his mid-50s, after a Wednesday night Bible study, fell face first there on the floor in the foyer with a grand mal seizure and a brain tumor. When we went through that with him and had the surgery, the recovery coming back, it wasn't that many years after that that her husband Thomas passed away. And along with the medical examiner and the mortician, the preacher's called. He died in his sleep in his bed. And to be able to get him out, the preacher, all those kind of experiences you don't train for, right? Have to help the mortician get him out of his bed and place him on the gurney and help get him to the car. Her grandson and another girl in the church had a brief affair and left the girl pregnant. And throughout all these things, this is one family with all of this going on. It was several years later that she looked at me, Janice looked at me again and said, I guess we'll hang on to it. I can't think of many of those situations where I didn't shed tears with those who saw over the situation, over the death, over the loss, over the destruction, over the consequences that would follow. I've written names here: Otto, Tim and Teresa, and Ron and Sissy, and Doyle and Victor and Amanda. And those are just the ones I could think of just right off the top of my head where I've been in those rooms where people have breathed their last. Or those counseling situations, more names than I have space for on the paper, who are struggling. And I've often thought to myself as a preacher that I need to be stoic. I need to be solemn during those funerals and those sad times. Don't let your emotions show, Kevin. Too many will see it as weakness. And I think to myself after that thought, however unintentional it happens, we sometimes leave that impression with those who preach. Isn't that exactly the opposite of what Paul tells us in Romans 15? Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those that weep. In other words, feel what they feel. Isn't that what Jesus did? As I was reading the context in and around the Romans 15, the context of the passage is all about one another. We are members of the same body. We are members of one another. We share our gifts with one another: service and teaching and exhortation and giving and guidance and mercy. We're to love one another. We are to give preference to one another. Those are all one another thoughts. See, what affects you absolutely is supposed to affect me. I can no longer watch people whose hearts are breaking cry and not feel something. I don't know where we got the impression that the fellow body members should show absolutely no emotion. That's not true in the physical body. I have a scar on my thumb. If you were up close enough, you could see it. I've had it for 40 years. I was working at a grocery store, and we were putting up stocking shelves and things, and had a can of green beans or whatever, and you stick it up there, and you leave it out a little ways. You cut this side, and then you cut this side, and then you cut across, and you stack it back up, and you have a nice wall of goods. We were doing this late at night, and we were trying to hurry, try to get done in that last hour right there and get out of the store. And so you take the box knife and you cut this side and you flip it to this hand and you cut that side, but you're trying to hold it from coming off of the shelf. And the right hand got a little too close and sliced all the way to the bone. You know what the body didn't do? The body didn't say, "Stupid finger. Why did you get in the way? Don't you know box knives are sharp? Don't you know that's dangerous to place your hand there?" It also didn't say, "Well, I'm glad it wasn't me." Little toe didn't look up and say, "Well, I'm glad it was you, not me." Oh, no. My shoulder slumped. My other hand rushed to this hand. to cradle it and caress it. My eyes began to water. My feet began to dance. My body screamed to every other member to come to the rescue of the damaged finger. Feel with the finger. That's what we're supposed to do. That's what we do when we walk beside those who've lost loved ones and are dealing with divorce, who are facing prospects of long-term disease and illness. We run to the rescue. We run to their aid. Last April, the church in Lampasas celebrated their 100th anniversary. Danny and I got to go. When we entered into that building, we had members of that family run to meet us. That's an amazing bond that we have together. And we were privileged to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And that privilege is a glorious thing.
Thank you, Kevin. My 5-year stint in a pulpit was before I came to school, so I learned a lot from the School of Hard Knocks. My biggest surprise in ministry was the joys that Kevin spoke of this morning and the deep bonds that you form like that. It is a wonderful thing. It is a glorious thing. Any guests with us this morning?